We all remember that Chairman Mao said that freedom comes from the end of a gun. That's what George Bush does, you know. Freedom comes from the end of a gun. Freedom by war. That sounds like George Orwell, not George Bush.
To me, what would most people do? I mean, you have another country invading your country. There's no clear objectives, there's no purpose to why they're here, to why they're there. They know we're there to take down Saddam Hussein, but to them, they just want you out of your country. You have their houses being raided and tore up. You have their sons and their husbands getting killed. Then you have them retaliating back, which causes chaos like there is there now. I don't think personally it's terrorists. No, it's not terrorists. It's the farmers and the fathers, the mothers, the children that are trying to fight for what they have, because that's all they do have.
The Pentagon says that in the 42 days of the Gulf War, there were 110,000 U.S. military sorties against Iraq. And they dropped 88,500, or maybe 400, 88,400 tons of explosives during that period of time. That's a sortie every 30 seconds. The explosive equivalent is 7.5 times the bomb that incinerated Hiroshima, which is not just 7.5 places. It's scattered all over the country, and it was targeting many of the facilities that civilian life is most dependent on. Take water supply, which second to air is the thing that we can last least long without. And they hit the reservoirs up in the north, big dams. They hit the pipelines that would bring the water down. It'd be gravity flow sometimes for a while. And then they hit the pumping stations, because lower Iraq particularly is very flat. They hit the filtration plants where you purify the water so it'll be good. So that when I went in on the 2nd of February 1991, there was no running water anywhere. If you were lucky and lived out in the countryside, you might have a well, you might have an electric generator, and you could pump water out of it. But in Basra and Samarra and Baghdad, none of the places had any running water at that time, because we knocked out all the electricity as well as, and people were going down to the Tigris and getting water. You get thirsty pretty quick, and there wasn't bottled water available for the vast majority of the population. Even in the hospitals, there wasn't enough bottled water. You'd have an infant dehydrating, and they can dehydrate quickly, and the mother's suffering from malnutrition because the sanctions had been in effect since August. Maybe not malnutrition, but she just doesn't have a lot to eat. And 2 weeks into the war, there's even less because you couldn't distribute the food. And so you've got to feed your baby, and you don't have milk, you don't have powdered milk or infant formula. So you get some water and you take some sugar and you give it to the baby, and the baby 48 hours dehydrated and dead. I talked with the head of the Red Crescent, who was, of all things, he was a pediatrician, trained as a pediatrician, trained in England as a pediatrician, but he'd become the head of the Red Crescent, which is the equivalent of the Red Cross in Arab countries. And he said as of about the 8th or 9th of February, which is roughly halfway through the bombing, maybe not quite, that he thought probably 6,000 children had died already as a direct result of bad water and related effects of the bombing.
I was in the Sinui Triangle, which you have, it's basically like a triangle that goes from Baghdad and it goes straight west, then it goes up to the north a little bit, and it's on the Syrian border. Most of it runs across the Euphrates River because there they have their water. It's good places to populate. You have Fallujah, you have Ramadi, you have Al-Kahim, you have Habani and Chaldea, which are all basically on Highway 10 going straight to the west of Syria. To me, we started a lot of the violence ourselves, as American soldiers we did. When you go into combat, they have regulations and rules that you're supposed to abide by. Basically, you're told if you think somebody throws a rock, then you shoot them, because what if it was a grenade? So basically, you're covering yourself. I mean, that's what they want you to do. For one, you're doing on a traffic control point where you have to pull everybody, check for contraband and stuff. And like I said, when I was there, they didn't have to go signs in Arabic saying you need to stop here to be checked. all it was you're putting your hand out like this, or you're just waving them down to stop. Well, the first time that it happened, it was actually, I was in the front because I was the one checking the vehicles, and then it's our platoon. So like one armored personnel carrier's here, one's here, one's here. And the traffic sort of does like a S through it or whatever. Well, you have a car coming up and just all hell broke loose, is the way we considered it. The ground started shaking, all you hear is gunfire. So I dropped to the ground like most of us did because we thought we were the ones getting attacked. But as what actually happened is there was a car that just started coming through without stopping. And when we all got back there, it was a man and his child in there. The man's completely, he's about dismembered all over. You have the kid there, so we all felt bad for it because we patched their wounds up as quick as we could, put them in the back of our tanks and hauled them as fast as we could to a hospital. And then after that point, we never had instances like that because I think all of us learned that you can't just do it because you can, You don't want to do it unless you really have to do that. And of course, they're like, well, what if a car bomb's in there and they just, do a suicide bomb to you? I guess they'll have to take that chances because I don't see this reason of killing 1,000 people for that one chance that it might happen.
On Hiroshima Day, which implies at least an insensitivity to human suffering, the United Nations Security Council, but at the insistence of the United States, my own country, imposed the most severe sanctions ever imposed on a country against Iraq, August the 6th of 1990. And those sanctions remained pretty much in effect. There was an authorization in 96, 97 of food for oil. Never worked very well. But they remained in effect up until shock and awe, which is a terrorist phrase when you think about it. I mean, we're going to shock you and place you in awe. And they were genocidal, unbelievable. UNICEF made a study in August, completed it in August of 1991, and reported that 47,500 children under the age of 5 are dead as a direct result of the sanctions. In September or October of 1996, the Food and Agriculture Organization completed a major study in which they said 585,000 children under the age of 5 have died as a direct result of the sanctions. Now, that doesn't include elderly who are vulnerable. It doesn't include people with special medical problems. I mean, if you had diabetes or something in which you needed regular medication, or you needed dialysis or whatever it was, or you die, you were dead because you couldn't get medicine for your diabetes. You couldn't get for your kidney problem. You couldn't get the dialysis machine. And then so the elderly and pregnant women and nursing mothers need more nutrition, and they're likely to need more types of medication. So before the beginning of the war of aggression on March 19th, 2003, more than 1.5 million people had died as a direct result of the sanctions, and more than half were children under the age of 5. It's genocide, clearly.
The real reason we're in Iraq is for the oil possession. It's strategically located for the fact that it's right by the Persian Gulf. They can run lines down there, hit right to their boats. I mean, it was whoever did it, they thought of it and they did it well, except for the fact is they didn't expect the resistance from the Iraqi people. They didn't think they were going to fight like that to get the United States out of their country. And now it's kicked the United States in the butt because it is happening like that. And it's never going to end. You can never take the will of a people and kill everybody, because the will of the people is always going to be there. And for the ones I met there, there's really nice Iraqi people, and they're never going to give up. I wouldn't in my own case. I used to say all the time while I was there to my fellow friends, we all used to say, if the United States was to come, if another country was to come to the United States like this, we'd all be dead because I'd be killing right and left. I mean, anybody would. Nobody would put up with that.
If you want freedom, you have to reach out to people and you have to uplift people. You don't get freedom by bombing people, by destroying countries. And by huge military expenditures that endanger life physically and deplenish resources that are needed to feed and clothe and house and educate a healthy population.
Recognizing the battle that you're in is half of the battle. And we now recognize that PR and spin and manipulation from the Department of Defense has stalled scientists and researchers and Gulf War veterans from receiving the kind of care they need because the science hasn't been conducted.
Well, to me, I'd have to say the way that the United States government spins things to what they want people to hear, what they want the mass of the United States to think, is everybody was so scared when 9/11 happened, and it was happening from terrorists. The United States public is scared shitless of terrorists. They're completely scared of them. They just wait for it to happen again. I mean, they do all these different measures now to buy this to make yourself a safe room. They took and grabbed that, and they knew that if they could use that towards Iraq, who's going to complain? So then the way they foreshadow that is every time on TV, every time a United States soldier dies by a terrorist. What does America want? They want every terrorist to be dead. They're not saying that it's an Iraqi civilian because then America would be starting to think, okay, well, what's going on here? Why is innocent civilians dying?
It's extremely difficult today to know what's going on in Iraq or even on major domestic political issues, but particularly in foreign affairs where it's life or death. I mean, we have soldiers dying every day in Iraq right now, and we don't really know. Was this a war of aggression, the supreme international crime, according to the Hiroshima judgment, that we waged against, was it self-defense?
When President Bush got on there and said we was going for reasons of weapons of mass destruction, I mean, the United States is supposed to have the most sophisticated spy networks, the CIA and everything else. They knew there wasn't them weapons there because they would have known, they probably would have known the day they walked into that country because all the sanctions against them.
Let's recognize that our government isn't afraid to, just like any good corporation, put its spin on the news and then project it out to the public.
It's like a big lie, and they just keep dragging it out because they can, with the fact they use terrorism. That scares the people to a point where the United States public wants anything done to terrorism to get rid of it around the whole entire world. That's why they're labeling Iran and Syria. The next thing you know, every Arab country in the Middle East is going to be considered as terrorist havens. Give us a reason to invade them all.
What's our huge military occupation of that country doing to it? And by what right under international law are we there? These are things that the people have to have access to the facts about, or they can't make a meaningful judgment.
Having served as an Army Ranger and having worked with Special Forces and witnessed information warfare directed against the enemy, I began to realize that that is what was happening to us, that here in the United States, our government was conducting information warfare to dispel the myth that Gulf War veterans were sick because of exposures.
Democracy really doesn't have much meaning or value if the people aren't informed, if they don't have access to the truth. How can you make a meaningful judgment if you're ignorant of the facts?
I think that some people who don't take the time to educate themselves on whatever the issue might be, whether it be the conduct of a war, the use of a weapon, or what it takes to be a soldier, if they don't educate themselves and they simply allow themselves to have that information fed to them through a soda straw, looking through a soda straw basically, not seeing what's happening to the left and to the right, I think those people are easily swayed. I think that they find comfort in having someone else tell them what the world is all about and what's happening in the world. In the first Gulf War, the things that veterans were exposed to were first the environment. The sand in Iraq is approximately 2 microns. It's very respirable. Anything that lays on the sand, is sprayed on the sand, or falls on the sand is easily ingested. Another exposure was the largest man-made natural disaster, which was the burning of the 600 oil well fires. Soldiers lived in that smoke for weeks at a time. Another exposure that soldiers had were investigational new drugs and vaccines that were not FDA approved but were being used for soldiers for hopefully a prophylaxis against diseases, even though they weren't tested.
I had to take the anthrax vaccination, the smallpox vaccination. They fill you with so many vaccinations, I couldn't even tell you what. I mean, it's like you sign a paper, basically you're a test dummy for the government. They can pop you with anything they want, they don't even have to tell you what it is.
The anthrax injection when I was in, was mandatory for any forward deployed troops, anybody that was going into a potential danger zone. Subsequently, at least right now, the federal judge has deemed them illegal, and they're not mandatory. Anybody can refuse them.
A lot of us got really sick from it, from the anthrax especially. You get real bad, I think it was fever. It got real bad for a lot of us.
There's plenty of injections that I've received that I don't know what they were. I'll never know. They're not in my record, but I know I received them.
Another exposure of the first Gulf War, besides the oil well fires, pyrrhostigmine bromide, and the anthrax vaccine, and the endemic diseases and the environment, was the exposure to low-level chemical warfare agent. We bombed over 900 facilities that were either known or suspected chemical warfare agent storage facilities. The reason there is no WMD in Iraq today is because we blew up 90% to 95% of the WMD that was in Iraq in the first Gulf War, and that went into the atmosphere. Now, at first our government said that no one could have possibly been exposed to low-level chemical warfare agent because Saddam didn't use offensive chemicals. But we proved, after working with Congress, finding intelligence information, looking at the intelligence from Iraq's own bomb makers, that Saddam did in fact have weaponized stocks of sarin, cyclosarin, VX, and other nerve agents, and that we blew it up during the first Gulf War. So in 1997, there was a huge admission by the government that soldiers were in fact exposed to low-level chemicals. We were rolling through the different storage facilities. Explosive ordnance people were blowing up remnants of ammunition and stocks that Saddam had buried in different places. And Qamishiyah was a place where engineers from the 82nd Airborne found a whole bunch of 155 shells and 122 millimeter rockets. Unbeknownst to the soldiers that were rolling through the area of Qamishiyah, internal documents showed that the government was aware that Qamishiyah was a known chemical weapons storage facility. So when the first Gulf War kicked off and they rolled through Qamishiyah to destroy the munitions that were there, they did not know that they were blowing up chemical warfare agents. And that secret was kept up until 1997, when we, my organization, and others obtained documents to prove that a low-level chemical warfare agent exposure had occurred. And subsequent to that revelation, that Gulf War veterans were in fact exposed to low levels of chemical warfare agent, the DoD has been slow but has been forced to admit other exposures. For example, for Vietnam veterans, there was no way to prove who got sprayed with Agent Orange, but we knew, and they knew then, that Agent Orange had potential health risks. They knew before they used it. So to compensate, Congress decided that we would form what's called a presumption. And if you step foot in Vietnam and you develop one of the illnesses that we know are related to exposure to dioxin, then it's presumed that you got it because of your exposure to Agent Orange. The same thing could be true, it's called in-country effect, for depleted uranium, the anthrax vaccine, the oil well fires. There wasn't anyone collecting data on the battlefield to prove how much people absorbed. But we know that we have a health effect because Gulf War veterans report to the VA at a higher rate than any other war. 697,000 people deployed, 330,000 have sought treatment from the Department of Veterans Affairs. And the one thing we know for certain, for a fact, is that it's not due to PTSD, because the PTSD rate for Gulf War veterans is lower than any other war, and it makes sense because it was a 100-hour war. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to look back over the last 50 years and look at syphilis testing in black veterans, mustard agent tests on Seventh-day Adventist, Project 112, the shipboard hazard and defense test of the 1960s. All of these things have occurred and slowly revealed themselves over time. Just the last couple of years, atomic veterans who were forced to sit out in the desert and be exposed to ionizing radiation, their health effects are just now being talked about and compensated for. So the government has a history of obfuscating these things when they think it's going to have a big impact. And the first Gulf War was an example of that. I see the Department of Defense making decisions that have guaranteed known risks to soldiers, but making them anyway without caring about the outcome because the primary objective is the goal that they want to reach.
I was there during the bombing. I spent 2 weeks driving north and south in Iraq in February of 1991. And we saw damage everywhere. We had no idea at that time that depleted uranium would be used against civilian facilities or against military facilities for that matter.
They didn't tell me. They didn't tell us. I don't know if they told the more infantry side.
Well, like we was told before we went over there that you're supposed to stay away from vehicles that's been exploded by military gunfire, tank fire. You're supposed to stay away from them. But it was in like the lasting rounds, like from aircrafts, you know, that would bomb the palaces and everywhere you lived in that was bombed out. So I mean, I think we all had the gist that we was going to have problems with it. I mean, I don't see how you could stay away from it where everything's been gunned.
I definitely didn't know. And even since then, I haven't heard of it. But I'm not surprised. There's so much that, we weren't told.
The last and final exposure, I think, that's most relevant that has yet to be really scientifically looked at is the issue of depleted uranium.
There's a report from England in the spring of '91 claiming that there had been the use of depleted uranium.
What happens is the depleted uranium penetrator strikes whatever armor target it's hitting or whatever building it's hitting, and as it hits and meets with other metal, it becomes pyrophoric and it burns. And it's almost like taking a knife, heating it on the stove and sticking it in butter. It actually just slides right in there real easy, and it burns and it melts and it passes through at very high speeds, kicking off these oxides, these respirable oxides that are anywhere between 2 to 5 microns. And those things, if you're in the vehicle, are respirable and you can get them into your lungs. Or even after the fact, there are vehicles in Iraq right now from the first Gulf War that were hit with depleted uranium penetrators where the oxides remain inside the vehicle. And if children are playing in those vehicles or you're taking a photograph in one of those vehicles, you can resuspend those oxides and breathe them into your body. And if they become lodged in your lung, there's new emerging science that talks about the possibility of genetic susceptibility, altering genes and altering the way your body system functions.
I remember being back in Basra in '92, and in the training and emergency hospital, the main hospital there, which I'd seen hit by a U.S. bomb in '91, and they were reporting Bedouins from west of Basra out in the desert where the Iraqi troops had been embedded waiting for the assault. Bedouins bringing children, primarily infants, and sometimes a story of a fetus that was deformed, into the hospital. And by 1993 or 4, they believed that it was being caused by depleted uranium. And we now know that there was an enormous use of depleted uranium in the Gulf War, and according to my information, 4 times more during 2003 during shock and awe.
We shot many tons of depleted uranium in the first Gulf War and continue to use it till today. And there are 2 sides of the issue. There's extremists on the left that claim that every illness in Iraq and every illness in soldiers and anything that happens to anybody is responsible because of depleted uranium use. And then there's the right, which is the Department of Defense, that has actually said it's safe and you can eat it. We think that both of those views are not really helping advance the issue. The way to solve this issue is to go back to Iraq and the places where we've used depleted uranium and measure its effect on the people that have lived in and around it for the last 13 years.
We went down with these measuring devices down into the desert where they had taken the tanks and other armor, and you bring the counter up against the where the depleted uranium shell hit the tank, and it'd go off the chart. I mean, the radiation was so intense. And sadly, you know how children are. if you didn't keep them away, they'd be playing on that military wreckage. So it's really extremely deadly.
There's a huge PR campaign to try and say that there's no health effect from DU, but laboratory studies and emerging science are going to prove that wrong.
The consequences have been an ever increasing rate of leukemia and cancer and tumors and all the things associated with exposure to radiation.
The government's position is it's safe and effective, end of story, no need to investigate. And we know that's not true. We know that large-scale epidemiological studies will rule in or rule out what the problem is, but they're fighting it. However, in Europe and other nations, to include the United Kingdom, they're contemplating going to another weapon system because of the threat that science will find out that it is causing problems and that it is going to be something that we're going to have to answer to through the Geneva Convention.
It lasts forever as far as history is concerned. Back in the civil rights days, one of the major leaders, Stokely Carmichael, said, "Power to the people." But that's got it backwards, really. The power is in the people. And that's a demographic truism. When the people work together, their power is overwhelming. When the people stand up and resist their government or demand of their government, the government has to comply. Today we see that the president of Ecuador has had to leave because of popular demand. The president of Bolivia left just recently because of popular demand. We saw the Shah have to leave Iran because of popular demand. The power is in the people. The question is whether they have the vision and the will and the courage to exercise their power.
Well, I think one of the most important things, no matter whether your issue be depleted uranium, global warming, whatever it is, you got to educate yourself on the issue. You can't just listen to what one side, the left, or one side, the right, says about these emerging issues. You have to educate yourself, and you have to dig really deep. And when you find that there are questions yet to be answered, then you need to get involved. You need to turn that into an advocacy that either changes laws, enacts policies, or assists the people that you're trying to assist.
You know, to have a people that insist upon the conduct of their government being honorable and decent and of service to the people and good for the people, good for children, you have to have population that want it. And you have to have population that have the commitment to stand up for it and to organize to obtain it. Democracy is supposed to be a method of doing that through the electoral process, but you really can't wait 2 years or 4 years for something that's important. You've got to be constantly on the alert. I mean, your vigilance and your constant activity to secure a better life for all Americans and for the whole world is the only solution that can work. And otherwise, it's going to degenerate into violence and chaos, as it has been doing, sadly, during my lifetime.
One of the things that bothers me the most about this war is people that will go out and get a yellow magnet and stick it on the back of their truck and then claim that's how they support troops. If you want to support a soldier when they come back, go to where they are, find out what their needs are, and help them. If you want to support the end of global warming or the use of depleted uranium, then join organizations, educate yourself, and form a strategy to find the answers that will make your issue rise to national prominence and achieve the goals that you want.
I think the first thing that you can do to try and start to do anything for this large part of the world's population that's affected by conflict is to get interested in it and to try and find out about what's going on. I think that there are means to do so now, and a lot more than there used to be. Even though the media, in terms of any kind of objective reporting, has dropped off in the last couple of decades in terms of quality, and it's being much more tied up now. There are lots of independent media, small organisations that will give information and that you can find very easily in richer countries if you have access to the internet. It's easy to find out what's going on. So I think the first thing to do is find out what's going on in the world and be interested, and not just to think of your own town and your own problems. And then to find out about your government's actions, find out about what your government's doing because you voted for them, and to know what they're doing, particularly in the parts of the world where people are less comfortable, and what their political interest is, and what they're trying to achieve, and to contest them where necessary. And I think they're the first things that any citizen of a rich country can do today.
You know, things can seem pretty bad, and you can let that defeat you in and of itself and get you down. But you better stand up and enjoy life. You've got to fulfill yourself. And it doesn't matter how tough things look or how unjust they look. Stand up and struggle. And the real joy of life will be trying to achieve something that you yourself deem mighty and important for yourself and others. You do that and you'll have a happy life and you may make a difference.